So, we're coming to the home stretch, as this will be the last thing I will be discussing with you for the semester. Wow, time really flies. Which I think this is a great chapter to end on. Chapter 11, which is going over motivation and emotion. How you're going to go on in the future for the remainder of your studies. Mythbuster time. This is going to be the assignment that you'll have to do. Um, Basically, you have to look and see what's true and what's false and tell me what you think. I'm not going to go over these. They'll be on the assignment where you can read them, okay? You'll also be able to find it uh, under the module section for chapter 11. Now, when we talk about motivation and emotion, everybody has a different definition for it. Here's the one I want you to know and understand as far as for the textbook. Motivation is a set of factors that will activate, direct, and maintain a behavior, and is usually directed towards some goal. Whereas emotion is a more subjective feeling that will include arousal, such as our heart pounding or heart palpitations, our thoughts, values, and expectations, or cognition, as well as how we express these behaviors, that being with facial expressions like smiles, frowns, or even running. So, of course, within psychology, we have theories. We always have a foundation and we have theories toward any topic that we can relate to in psychology. So, we have the theories of motivation. Now, there's 6 major theories that we're going to be looking at, and it's broken down within 2 different categories. First one being biological, in which we'll look at instinct, we'll look at drive reduction, we'll look at optimal arousal, and then there's the psychological, where we'll then look more at the incentives or the cognition, and then there's also biopsychosocial. And here, again, we'll look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We kind of went over that already, so we'll be brief and quick with that one, but still important to know in terms of for this chapter. So let's break it down first with the biological theories. Instinct theories in the earliest days of psychology, researchers like William McDougall proposed that humans had numerous instincts, that being repulsion, curiosity, as well as self-assertiveness. Then there's been other researchers that later added their favorite instincts, and by the time we got to the 1920s, mind you, I didn't say William he was actually about 1908. But by the time we got to the 1920s, there was a list of recognized instincts that had become, extremely long. There was one researcher that found listings for over 10,000 human instincts. That's a lot to try to list, ain't it? Additionally, the label instinct led to an unscientific circular type of explanations where men are aggressive because they are instinctually aggressive, or women are automatically considered maternal because they have a natural maternal instinct. Recent recent years, we see a branch of biology that's called sociobiology, where it's revived the case for instincts when strictly defined. Sociobiologists such as Edward Wilson, back in '75, believed that humans also had instincts, and like competition or aggression, which are genetically transmitted from one generation to the next. Then we have what we call drive reduction theory. Back in the 30s, this concept of drive and drive reduction began to replace the theory of instincts. According to Hull, the drive reduction theory is when the biological needs, such as food or water or oxygen, they're not met. And what happens is there's a state of tension, which would be considered the drive that would be created. So drive is a state of tension, and once it's created, the organism would then be motivated to kind of reduce that drive. So the drive reduction theory is based largely on the biological concept of homeostasis. Again, this is a term that literally means us standing still, us being balanced. Okay? Now, we then have the optimal optimal arousal theory. And according to this theory, organisms are going to be more motivated to achieve and to be able to maintain an optimal level of arousal that maximizes one's performance. So we're either going to be too little or too much aroused, and that arousal would diminish performance. So, what motivates people to to use the bungee jump, or go over deep canyons, or want to do white water rafting down some dangerous river? Basically, according to research, these are considered to be called high sensation seekers, and they may be biologically pre-wired to be able to have that need than many of us to have that kind of stimulation. It's also suggested that there's four distinct factors that characterize sensation seeking. The first one being thrill and adventure seeking. These are individuals who might want to jump and do some skydiving, or they'll want to think they're in the movie Fast and Furious and drive real quick, or they're trying to, you know, beat a train. Which please, please, please don't ever try to do that. It's just so sad and it's a miserable death if you ask me. Second one, we have those with experience seeking. These individuals, you might find them trying to travel. They'll, interact and have unusual friends or friendships. They might dip and dab a little in drug experimentation. The third one is called disinhibition, and basically, this is an individual who letting everything go. They're letting loose. They don't have a care in the world. They're just gonna respond and react. The last one is those who might be susceptible to boredom. These are individuals that'll have a lower tolerance for repetition and sameness. It's like you get them, they get in a rut when they get into a routine. When being very high or very low in sensation seeking, this may cause problems with relationships with individuals who may score toward the other extreme. This will be true not just between partners or spouses, but also between a parent and child, or uh, if I'm working with a client, it could be between me and a client. It might also be within a job, and there might be difficulties in terms of for a high sensation seeker, and they're in a regular clerical job, or they're only, or they might be working at Nissan doing a line factory work or some sort, which is really not up to their expectations based upon the fact that they're sensation seekers. Those who have low sensation when seeking, they're highly challenging and they have variable occupations. Now, let's talk about incentives. So, one thing that is that unlike drive reduction, this theory here will state that the internal factors is going to push people more in certain directions. And then its incentive theory is going to maintain that external stimuli will pull people toward desirable goals or away from undesirable ones. Most of us initially would eat because we're hungry, and we'll push, you know, it'll push us to go and find food. That would be the drive reduction theory. But the sight of apple pie or ice cream too often pulls us toward continued eating. That continued eating is considered the incentive theory, in that we see it, we want it, we go for it. Now, we have also the cognitive theory, and according to this theory, motivation really is directly affected by attributions, or how we might think or interpret about our own or other actions. If you receive a high grade from my class, for example, then you can interpret that grade in several different ways. You might see it as you earned it because you really studied hard, or you might see it as, oh man, I lucked out. Or this textbook that was provided to you, you might consider it to have been really interesting and helpful in, how you was going to interpret. So researchers basically have found that people who attribute their success to personal ability and the effort tend to work harder toward their goals than people who may attribute it to luck. Individuals who attribute it to luck hopes and think they are lucky enough to have everything fall in their lap. There are expectancies or what we anticipate or assume will happen, and as well as it's also important to know that the cognitive theories of motivation, your anticipated grade, for example, on a test would affect your willingness to study. If you got an A in the beginning of the course, then you're going to study really hard because you want to keep getting A's. Whereas if you wound up with an F in the first exam, then you might create a pattern of an F thereafter, as you're not motivated to work harder because you've kind of already given up. So if we also look at your expectation in terms of salary, if you if you thinking of future salary increases or promotions at work, your effect on willingness to work overtime for no pay, that's going to kind of bring it down. So your performance may also come down. The incentive is not there. Now, quick review of hierarchy of needs. Remember, this is Abraham Maslow, and this is based upon the fact that he feels that there are several stages that we work toward when we're trying to reach nirvana or self-actualization. Um, and as such, these physiological and safety needs, we work toward trying to meet them. Uh, Remember though, this must be met before we can advance to higher needs. So if you don't have your physiological needs in place or in check, like if you're not eating, if you are starving for water, there's no way you're going to be able to think about safety or think about others, or you're not going to have a high self-esteem and so forth. So remember, one step has to be completed to reach the next. All right. So as I mentioned before, there's been criticisms. Pretty much, just remember, this is one of those that really defines the art of psychology rather than simply empirical. It's more based upon westernized philosophy, and it doesn't fit in every situation. So I'm going to stop right there, and we'll pick up on the next slide thereafter.